there's a master who's about to die. And he says, what are the positions that masters have died in? And of course, lots of people die on their backs, etc. He said, well, has anybody died upside down? They said, no. So he stood on his head and died.
When it comes to humor, John Morrell doesn't miss his mark. Whether teaching a class involving humor and religion or preparing his next research project, Morrell, professor of religious studies at the College of William & Mary, has become recognized as a national expert on the subject. Recently, he published his 5th book on humor, Comic Relief, A Comprehensive Philosophy of Humor. So, John, why did you write this book?
I've been thinking about humor in an academic way for about 30 years now. About 4 years back, I started to revise my thinking about humor, not in any essential ways, but the big idea that I wanted to add was that humor is a kind of playfulness. As I worked all this out, I came up with a new book. This is just the cover. And the new book is called Comic Relief, A Comprehensive Philosophy of Humor. I try to trace the origins of laughter back through evolution. If you look, for example, at chimps have a laugh, but it's on the intake. So instead of ha, 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 chimps laugh, ha, ha, ha. If you look at what play looks like in the apes and in most animals, it's based on aggression. So play for chimpanzees, for example, is I bite your arm, or I chase you and wrestle you to the ground. Without a play signal, without some way that you know that I'm not trying to hurt you, you would probably respond with aggression yourself.
You've been known to talk about the differences between tragic and comic characters.
I've got a 20-point contrast between tragedy and comedy, and it goes roughly like this. The tragic character is mentally rigid. They typically have a locked will. If you look at Oedipus Rex, for example, Oedipus Rex determines he's going to find the murderer of the previous king. Now, what he doesn't know is that he's the murderer of the previous king. So he's set his course, and once he's set his course, then it's full speed ahead. He's not going to look to the left or the right. He's not going to take no for an answer. The tragic hero always ends up getting in trouble for that, usually dying. So the locked will, the determination, this military way of looking at life, which we've seen a lot of in American politics, I argue is not as valuable as the comic attitude. Comic characters solve problems not head-on, not by facing them in a militarist, tragic way, but they are indirect. They use trickery, they use wordplay. Tragic character, of course, makes up their mind once and for all and dies. The comic character survives.
Often you refer to humor as a social lubricant.
Barack Obama, it seemed to me, started off on just the right foot between the election and his inauguration when he had to do that big press conference. And first they hit him with all the heavy stuff. What are you going to do about the economy? What are you going to do about health care? Then somebody threw him a softball question. And they said, what about the dog? What are you going to get for a dog? He said, what we'd really like to get is a mutt like me. And as soon as he said that, it seems to me, the country could kind of breathe easier. Yes, we've got the problems with the economy. Yes, we've got the problems with healthcare. Yes, we've got unemployment. But somebody who can say a mutt like me is somebody that you want in a leadership role. What you don't want is a heroic figure. You don't want a tragic figure or an epic figure who sees this as a war.
So what is it? Is life tragic or is it comic?
I do an exercise which I call tragedy or comedy. And I ask people to give me a story of something that was awful at the time, but sometime after that, you got to see it as funny. And let me give you from a group of nurses I did a couple years ago. I said, tell the story tragically. She said, okay. She said, Eileen and I were working the psychiatric floor, the 5th floor, and we had a patient who had a lot of problems. He had big mood swings, and he was on several different medications. Young man, he decided to commit suicide by jumping out the window. I said, oh, it sounds terrible. I said, now, how do you usually tell it? She said, well, the guy weighed over 400 pounds. He was dressed only in a hospital gown. The window he decided to jump out was only 18 inches wide. So he got his right arm out the window, he got his head and part of his shoulder out the window, and then he got stuck. She said, my friend and I were upstairs in the break room and we heard this voice, help, help. She said, we knew it was him, so we came running down the stairs. We swung and opened the doors to his room. We ran smack dab into this 400-pound ass. Now, my question to the nurses was, once they stopped laughing, is this tragic or comic? And the answer is yes, it's tragic or comic. The master Tozan was asked, what is the Buddha? And he answered, 3 pounds of flax. Flax is a material from which they make a fabric, linen. Now, the answer is utterly nonsensical.